The screech of tearing metal filled the command bridge as Queen Zara pressed her clawed hands against the viewport, watching her greatest nightmare unfold before her eyes. The massive Vorthak warship had just breached their defensive perimeter, its dark hull bristling with weapons aimed directly at the nursery sector of her flagship. Inside that sector, 300 young cubs from various allied species waited helplessly for evacuation that might never come. Captain Jake Morrison stood beside the alien queen, his weathered face grim as he studied the tactical display. The human had been serving as military advisor to the Galactic Coalition for 2 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Queen Zara, despite her formidable reputation as a warrior, trembled with a fear that went beyond mere concern for her subjects. These cubs represented the future of 12 different species, including her own people, the Cathari. The Vorthak had chosen their target well. They knew that attacking the nursery sector would force the Coalition fleet to spread their forces thin, trying to protect the most vulnerable while maintaining defensive positions. It was a cruel but effective strategy that exploited the Coalition's greatest strength and turned it into their greatest weakness. Queen Zara's feline features contorted with anguish as another explosion rocked the ship. Her ears, tall and pointed, flattened against her skull while her tail lashed behind her in agitation. The Cathari were proud descendants of an ancient feline species, but even their natural courage faltered when faced with the possible loss of their young ones. Jake watched the queen struggle with her emotions and made a decision that would change everything. He turned to Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, his communications officer, and spoke with calm authority that cut through the chaos surrounding them. The young woman looked up from her console, her dark eyes reflecting the red warning lights that bathed the bridge in an ominous glow. The Vorthak ship opened fire, sending bright energy beams toward the nursery sector. Queen Zara let out a sound that was part roar, part whimper, as she watched the deadly lights streak toward the most precious cargo in her fleet. Her worst fear was becoming reality right before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. But Jake Morrison was already moving. He grabbed his emergency kit from beneath his station and headed for the exit, calling back to Amy as he ran. The human had spotted something on the tactical display that everyone else had missed in their panic. There was still a chance, but it required someone to manually override the nursery sector's shield generators from the inside. Queen Zara spun around as she realized what Jake intended to do. Her golden eyes, usually so fierce and commanding, now showed raw terror at the thought of losing not just the cubs but also the human who had become one of her most trusted advisors. She called out to him, her voice cracking with emotion as she tried to order him to stop. Jake paused at the bridge entrance, looking back at the alien queen, who had shown him nothing but respect and friendship since his arrival. He could see the internal battle raging within her, the conflict between her duty as a ruler and her instincts as a protector of the young. The cubs needed someone to reach them, and he was the only one close enough to make it in time. Amy Rodriguez worked frantically at her console, trying to establish a communication link with the nursery sector while coordinating with the other ships in their fleet. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface as she attempted to reroute power to the failing shields. The Vorthak were systematically targeting their power grid, making each defensive measure less effective than the last. The ship shuddered again as another volley of enemy fire struck their hull. Queen Zara gripped the back of her command chair, her claws leaving deep gouges in the metal as she fought to maintain her composure. Every instinct told her to flee, to save what they could and abandon the nursery sector to its fate. But she could not bring herself to give such an order. Jake understood the weight of the moment as he stepped into the corridor. Behind him lay safety and the logical choice of staying with the command crew. Ahead lay a dangerous journey through damaged sections of the ship, with no guarantee that he could reach the nursery sector before the Vorthak broke through their defenses. The human took a deep breath and started running toward what might be his final mission. The corridor lights flickered as power fluctuations coursed through the ship's systems. Emergency crews rushed past Jake, carrying repair equipment and medical supplies to damaged areas throughout the vessel. None of them questioned why a human advisor was running toward the most dangerous part of the ship instead of staying safely on the bridge where he belonged. Queen Zara watched Jake disappear around a corner, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she had just sent one of her closest friends into mortal danger. The Cathari had strict codes about protecting their young, but they also valued courage above all other virtues. Jake Morrison embodied both principles in his reckless dash to save the cubs. Part 2. Jake Morrison's boots pounded against the metal deck plating as he raced through the ship's inner corridors, his emergency kit bouncing against his hip with each stride. The lights above him flickered constantly now, casting dancing shadows that made navigation more difficult. Twice he had to leap over twisted debris from damaged bulkheads, and once he nearly fell through a section where the deck plating had buckled from enemy fire. Behind him, Queen Zara was coordinating the fleet's defensive efforts, while fighting every instinct that told her to follow Jake into the dangerous sections of the ship. Her tactical officers provided constant updates on the Vorthak advance, each report worse than the last. The enemy had brought 3 heavy cruisers and twice as many smaller vessels, all focused on breaking through to the nursery sector. The Queen's communication officer, Lieutenant Commander Beth Williams, established contact with the remaining evacuation teams scattered throughout the ship. Most had been cut off from their intended routes by battle damage, leaving them stranded in various sections while enemy fire continued to rain down upon them. The systematic nature of the Vorthak attack suggested they had detailed intelligence about the coalition ship's layout. Jake reached the first major obstacle in his path when he arrived at a sealed blast door that separated him from the ship's central hub. The door's control panel showed red warning lights, indicating that the system had automatically locked down due to hull breaches in the surrounding area. He pulled out his emergency override device and began working to bypass the security protocols. Queen Zara felt her composure slipping as she watched the tactical display update in real time. The Vorthak had launched boarding pods toward their hull, small craft designed to penetrate their outer defenses and deploy ground troops inside the ship. If those soldiers reached the nursery sector before Jake could activate the emergency shields, every cub aboard would be lost. The blast door finally opened with a grinding mechanical sound that echoed through the damaged corridor. Jake stepped through and immediately felt the temperature drop significantly. This section of the ship had lost life support and his breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. He activated his emergency suit's heating system and pressed forward, knowing that every second counted. Amy Rodriguez continued working at her station, coordinating with the other coalition ships in their fleet while trying to provide cover for Jake's mission. The young lieutenant had served under Morrison for 6 months and had never seen him back down from a dangerous situation. She found herself praying to whatever gods might listen that he would succeed in reaching the cubs before the Vorthak broke through their defenses. The ship's intercom crackled to life, carrying the voice of Chief Engineer Bob Martinez from the engine room. His report was grim, but not unexpected. The Vorthak weapons were systematically targeting their power distribution network, slowly draining their ability to maintain shields and weapons simultaneously. They had perhaps 15 minutes before total system failure became inevitable. Queen Zara closed her eyes briefly, drawing upon the inner strength that had carried her people through numerous conflicts over the centuries. The Cathari had faced extinction before and survived through courage and determination. She would not let fear paralyze her now, even though every maternal instinct screamed at her to flee with whatever cubs they could save. Jake encountered his second major obstacle when he reached a section where enemy fire had ruptured both the outer hull and several internal barriers. Atmosphere was venting into space through a jagged hole nearly 3 meters wide, creating a howling wind that threatened to pull him toward the breach. He grabbed onto a support beam and worked his way carefully around the damaged area. The nursery sector lay just beyond this compromised section, but Jake could see that the direct route had become impassable. He would need to find an alternative path through the maintenance tunnels that ran parallel to the main corridors. These narrow passages were never designed for human occupancy, but they offered his only remaining option for reaching the cubs in time. Lieutenant Commander Williams received an urgent transmission from one of their escort vessels, reporting that Vorthak fighters had begun targeting the evacuation shuttles attempting to flee from the main ship. 3 small craft had already been destroyed, taking their crews and passengers with them into the cold vacuum of space. The enemy was determined to prevent any escape from their trap. Queen Zara felt her worst fears materializing with each passing moment. The cubs represented not just the future of their species, but also the innocent trust that parents throughout the galaxy had placed in the Coalition's protection. She had promised their families that the nursery sector was the safest place in known space, surrounded by the most advanced defenses available. Jake pulled himself into the maintenance tunnel system, his broad shoulders barely fitting through the narrow opening. The cramped space forced him to crawl on his hands and knees while dragging his equipment behind him. Emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows on the tunnel walls, and he could hear the distant sound of weapons fire echoing through the ship's structure. Amy Rodriguez monitored Jake's progress using the ship's internal sensor network, though several sections showed no readings due to battle damage. She relayed his approximate position to Queen Zara, who watched the tiny blip representing her human advisor inch slowly toward the nursery sector. The Queen's claws unconsciously extended and retracted as her anxiety reached new heights. The Vorthak boarding pods struck the ship's hull with tremendous impacts that shook the entire vessel. Queen Zara could see on her tactical display that the enemy soldiers were cutting their way through the outer barriers, seeking to establish beachheads inside the Coalition flagship. Once they gained entry, the situation would become exponentially more dangerous for everyone aboard. Jake emerged from the maintenance tunnels covered in dust and minor cuts from sharp edges in the cramped passages. He found himself in a corridor that led directly to the nursery sector's main entrance, but the way was blocked by debris from a collapsed support beam. The human pulled out his plasma cutter and began working to clear a path through the obstruction. Part 3. The plasma cutter's bright beam sliced through twisted metal with surgical precision as Jake worked to clear the debris blocking his path to the nursery sector. Each cut sent sparks cascading across the damaged corridor, illuminating the destruction that surrounded him. The air tasted of ozone and scorched electronics, while the distant rumble of weapons fire continued to shake the ship's superstructure. Queen Zara monitored Jake's progress from the bridge while simultaneously coordinating defensive measures against the Vorthak boarding parties that had begun cutting through the hull. Her tactical display showed red warning indicators spreading throughout the ship like a viral infection, each one representing another breach or system failure. The enemy was executing their assault with military precision that spoke of careful planning. Chief Engineer Martinez reported over the intercom that power levels had dropped another 15%. Forcing him to make difficult choices about which systems to maintain. Life support in non-essential areas was being redirected to weapons and shields, but even those defensive measures were failing under the sustained Vorthak assault. The enemy seemed to have unlimited ammunition and no concern for casualties. Jake finally cleared enough debris to squeeze through the gap, his emergency suit protecting him from the sharp metal edges that lined the narrow opening. On the other side, he found himself in a maintenance area that provided access to the nursery sector's primary systems. Banks of control panels lined the walls, their displays showing the current status of life support, artificial gravity, and emergency containment protocols. The sound of frightened young voices reached Jake's ears through the bulkhead that separated him from the main nursery area. Cubs from 12 different species were housed beyond that barrier, ranging in age from barely weaned infants to adolescents approaching maturity. All of them were innocent victims of a war they had not chosen, depending entirely upon adults to keep them safe from harm. Amy Rodriguez established a communication link between Jake and the bridge, allowing Queen Zara to speak directly with her human advisor as he worked. The alien queen's voice carried barely controlled emotion when she asked for a status report. She needed to know whether the cubs could be saved before making the agonizing decision to abandon the nursery sector to its fate. Jake examined the shield generator controls while explaining the situation to Queen Zara. The system had been damaged by enemy fire, causing the protective barrier to fluctuate unpredictably. However, the damage was repairable if someone could manually recalibrate the power distribution network from inside the maintenance area. The process would take approximately 10 minutes to complete properly. The ship shuddered violently as another Vorthak salvo struck their hull, this time targeting the section directly adjacent to the nursery sector. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout the vessel while damage control teams rushed to contain fires and atmospheric breaches. Queen Zara realized that they had perhaps 5 minutes before enemy fire penetrated the nursery sector's outer defenses. Lieutenant Commander Williams received reports from the Vorthak boarding party's progress through the ship's lower decks. The enemy soldiers were advancing methodically toward critical systems, using advanced cutting tools and explosive charges to bypass security barriers. Several Coalition Marines had already fallen defending key positions against the numerically superior invaders. Jake began the complex process of recalibrating the shield generators, his hands moving swiftly across multiple control interfaces while he spoke reassuring words to the cubs beyond the bulkhead. Many of the young ones had never experienced combat before, and their frightened cries tugged at his heart. He promised them that help was coming, even though he was not certain he could keep that promise. Queen Zara faced the most difficult decision of her reign as she watched the tactical display show Vorthak forces closing in on multiple fronts. Her fleet was outnumbered and taking heavy casualties, while boarding parties threatened to overwhelm their internal defenses. Logic dictated that she should order an immediate retreat to save what remained of her forces and minimize further losses, but the cubs in the nursery sector represented something far more valuable than military assets or strategic positions. They were the future of every species in the coalition, innocent lives that depended upon her protection. Queen Zara had sworn an oath to defend them with her life, and that oath meant more to her than tactical considerations or survival instincts. Jake worked frantically at the control panels while explosions echoed through the ship around him. The shield generator calibration required precise timing and steady hands, but the constant vibration from enemy weapons made accuracy difficult. He forced himself to focus on the task while blocking out the sounds of battle that raged beyond the bulkheads. Chief Martinez called from the engine room to report that Vorthak boarding parties had reached the secondary power distribution center. Coalition Marines were holding the position, but they were outnumbered 3-1 and running low on ammunition. If the enemy gained control of that facility, they could shut down life support throughout the ship and force a complete surrender. Amy Rodriguez coordinated with the other coalition vessels in the fleet, requesting immediate assistance for their flagship. 2 escort cruisers moved to provide additional cover, but they were also engaged with Vorthak forces and could only spare limited firepower. The battle was turning into a war of attrition that the coalition could not hope to win through conventional tactics. Queen Zara made her choice with the decisive authority that had earned her the loyalty of beings throughout the galaxy. She would not abandon the cubs, regardless of the cost to herself or her remaining forces. The Cathari had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious through courage and determination, rather than superior numbers or advanced technology. Jake completed the first phase of the shield generator recalibration just as another massive explosion rocked the nursery sector. The lights flickered ominously while dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. He could hear the frightened calls of the cubs growing more desperate as they sensed the danger closing in around them. The human advisor pressed his face against the small viewport that allowed him to see into the main nursery area. Hundreds of young beings huddled together for comfort while their automated caretakers tried to maintain order. Species that were natural enemies in the wild had bonded together in their shared fear, creating a scene that embodied everything the coalition represented. Lieutenant Commander Williams announced that Vorthak fighters were beginning another attack run against the nursery sector, their weapons charged and targeting systems locked onto the most vulnerable part of the ship. Queen Zara ordered all available defensive batteries to focus on intercepting the incoming assault, knowing that this might be their final chance to protect the cubs. Jake initiated the second phase of the shield calibration process, while speaking calmly to the young ones beyond the bulkhead. His voice carried the confidence and authority of someone who had never failed in his duty to protect others. The cubs quieted slightly, responding to the reassuring tone even though many could not understand his words. Part 4. The second phase of the shield calibration required Jake to physically access 3 separate control nodes located throughout the maintenance area, each one connected to different aspects of the defensive grid. He moved quickly between stations while keeping one eye on his chronometer, knowing that the Vorthak fighters would complete their attack run in less than 3 minutes. Every second counted now. Queen Zara watched her tactical display with growing desperation as her defensive batteries engaged the incoming enemy fighters. The automated systems targeted the lead craft with impressive accuracy, but the Vorthak pilots were skilled and their ships heavily shielded. 2 fighters exploded in brilliant fireballs, but 4 others continued their attack approach despite taking significant damage. The cubs in the nursery sector had begun singing a traditional lullaby from one of the coalition worlds, their young voices joining together in a melody that transcended species barriers. The hauntingly beautiful sound reached Jake through the bulkhead, strengthening his determination to complete his mission regardless of personal risk. These children deserve to grow up and contribute their unique gifts to galactic civilization. Chief Engineer Martinez worked desperately to maintain power levels while Vorthak boarding parties continued their assault on critical systems throughout the ship. He had been forced to abandon 3 secondary power stations as enemy soldiers overwhelmed the Marine defenders. The main reactor was still secure, but its output was being steadily reduced by damage to the distribution network. Jake completed the calibration of the second control node and moved toward the third station, which was located near the section's outer hull. As he worked, he could hear the distinctive whine of energy weapons being charged just beyond the bulkhead. The Vorthak fighters were preparing to deliver their killing blow to the nursery sector, and his shield repairs might be the only thing standing between the Cubs and certain destruction. Amy Rodriguez coordinated defensive fire from the bridge while maintaining communication with Jake and monitoring his progress through the internal sensor network. The young lieutenant had served in numerous combat situations, but nothing had prepared her for the emotional weight of this moment. The fate of hundreds of innocent children hung in the balance of one man's technical expertise. Queen Zara felt her composure finally beginning to crack under the enormous pressure of command. Her ears flattened against her skull while her tail lashed behind her in agitation, unconscious displays of the stress that threatened to overwhelm her legendary self-control. The Cathari Queen had faced death countless times without flinching, but the possibility of failing these defenseless cubs pushed her to her emotional limits. The Vorthak fighters completed their final approach and opened fire with synchronized precision, sending streams of concentrated energy toward the nursery sector's weakened shields. Jake threw himself at the third control node, his fingers flying across the interface as he attempted to bring the defensive grid online before the enemy weapons reached their target. Lieutenant Commander Williams received damage reports from throughout the ship as Vorthak boarding parties pressed their assault on multiple fronts. Marine squads were falling back to secondary positions while trying to buy time for civilian evacuations in other sectors. The enemy seemed to have unlimited reinforcements and showed no mercy toward wounded defenders who could no longer fight. Jake felt the control panel grow hot under his hands as he pushed the shield generators beyond their designed operational limits. The recalibration process was complete, but the damaged systems were struggling to handle the massive power requirements needed to deflect the incoming attack. Warning lights flashed across all 3 control nodes while alarms wailed throughout the maintenance area. The nursery sector's shields flickered to life just as the Vorthak energy beams struck with devastating force. The defensive barrier held for several seconds, absorbing and deflecting the concentrated firepower that would have instantly vaporized everything beyond the hull. But Jake could see from his monitoring displays that the shields were failing rapidly under the sustained assault. Queen Zara witnessed the shield activation from her command station and felt a surge of hope that quickly turned to despair as the readings showed critical system failures throughout the defensive grid. The barriers were holding for now, but they could not withstand much more punishment before collapsing completely. Jake had succeeded in the first part of his mission, but the Cubs were still in mortal danger. Chief Martinez reported that the main reactor was approaching critical overload due to the massive power draw from the repaired shield generators. He could maintain current output levels for perhaps 2 more minutes before being forced to initiate an emergency shutdown that would leave the entire ship defenseless. The engineer was already preparing the procedures needed to safely contain a reactor breach. Jake realized that the shield generators needed constant manual adjustment to maintain their effectiveness against the Vorthak's assault. He positioned himself at the primary control station and began making rapid modifications to the power distribution patterns, essentially becoming a living component of the defensive system. The process required his complete attention and left him vulnerable to any boarding parties that might breach the maintenance area. The surviving Vorthak fighters regrouped for another attack run while their boarding parties intensified their assault on the ship's internal defenses. Queen Zara could see that the enemy was coordinating their efforts to maximize the pressure on her forces, using both external firepower and internal sabotage to overwhelm the coalition's ability to respond effectively. Amy Rodriguez detected movement in the corridors leading toward Jake's position, signatures that matched Vorthak boarding party equipment and weapons. She immediately alerted the remaining Marine squads, but most were already engaged in desperate battles elsewhere throughout the ship. Only a small team was available to reinforce the nursery sector's defenses against enemy infiltration. Jake continued his manual adjustments to the shield generators while the Cubs' lullaby grew louder behind the bulkhead. The young ones had somehow sensed that their protectors were fighting for their lives, and they responded with the simple courage that children display in the face of overwhelming fear. Their voices gave Jake strength as he performed the most important work of his career. Queen Zara made another command decision that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone aboard her flagship. She ordered all remaining defensive batteries to focus exclusively on protecting the nursery sector, even though this meant leaving other parts of the ship vulnerable to attack. The Cub's survival took precedence over every other consideration, including her own safety and the survival of her crew. The ship's intercom carried reports of Vorthak soldiers breaking through the outer defensive perimeter around the nursery sector complex. Jake could hear weapons fire in the corridors beyond his position, growing closer with each passing moment. He had perhaps 1 minute before enemy troops would discover his location and attempt to stop his efforts to protect the Cubs. Part 5. Jake heard the distinctive sound of Vorthak energy rifles echoing through the corridor outside the maintenance area, as enemy boarding parties systematically searched for the source of the shield interference. The alien soldiers moved with professional efficiency, checking each room and access point while their weapons remained ready for immediate use. He knew they would find him soon, but the shield generators still needed constant adjustment to maintain their effectiveness. Queen Zara dispatched her personal guard unit to reinforce the nursery sector, despite the protests of her security chief who insisted that the bridge required maximum protection. The Cathari Queen refused to remain safely in her command center while the Cubs faced mortal danger just meters away. Her elite warriors acknowledged the order with grim determination, understanding that they might not survive the coming battle. The Cubs' lullaby continued to drift through the bulkhead, but Jake could detect a change in their voices that spoke of growing fear. Some of the older children had obviously realized the seriousness of their situation, and they were trying to comfort the younger ones while maintaining their own courage. Their bravery in the face of terror reminded Jake why the coalition was worth defending against all odds. Chief Engineer Martinez made the difficult decision to begin a controlled shutdown of secondary systems throughout the ship, redirecting all available power to the nursery sector's defensive grid. This action would leave most of the vessel in darkness and disable non-essential life support, but it might provide Jake with enough energy to keep the shields operational for a few more minutes. Lieutenant Commander Williams coordinated with the Marine squads that were falling back toward the nursery sector while engaging Vorthak boarding parties at every choke point. The coalition defenders were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with desperate courage to buy time for Jake's mission. Several had already made the ultimate sacrifice, and their comrades stepped over their fallen bodies to continue the battle. Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead as he worked frantically at the control panels, making split-second adjustments to compensate for fluctuations in the power grid. The shield generators were operating far beyond their design specifications, and he could see stress fractures beginning to appear on several critical components. The entire system was on the verge of catastrophic failure. The sound of weapons fire grew much closer, and Jake could hear Vorthak's voices speaking in their harsh native language just outside the maintenance area. The enemy soldiers had obviously detected the energy signatures from his equipment and were preparing to breach the final barrier between themselves and the shield control systems. He estimated that he had less than 30 seconds before they broke through. Queen Zara received reports that her personal guard unit had engaged Vorthak forces in the main corridor leading to the nursery sector. The elite Cathari warriors were holding their position despite taking casualties, but they could not maintain their defensive line indefinitely against superior numbers. The Queen felt each loss personally, knowing that these brave soldiers were dying to protect children who were not even their own. Amy Rodriguez detected massive energy buildups in the Vorthak fighters as they prepared for another coordinated assault on the nursery sector. The enemy pilots had learned from their previous attack and adjusted their tactics accordingly, planning to overwhelm the defensive shields through concentrated firepower delivered simultaneously from multiple angles. The assault would begin in approximately 40 seconds. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He activated the emergency lockdown protocols for the maintenance area, sealing all entrances with reinforced blast barriers that would take the Vorthak soldiers several minutes to breach. This action trapped him inside with the shield generators, but it also guaranteed that he could continue his work without interference from enemy forces. The cubs seemed to sense the approaching climax of the battle, and their lullaby took on a more urgent quality as older children encouraged the younger ones to sing louder. Jake found himself humming along with the melody while his hands moved across the control interfaces with practiced precision. The young voices gave him strength and reminded him why every sacrifice was worthwhile. Chief Martinez watched his power distribution displays with growing concern as the strain on the ship's reactor approached dangerous levels. The sustained output required to maintain the nursery sector's shields was pushing the fusion containment system to its absolute limits. He had perhaps 2 minutes before being forced to initiate an emergency scram that would leave the entire ship powerless. The Vorthak boarding parties began using heavy cutting equipment to breach the blast barriers protecting Jake's position. Bright sparks flew as their industrial torches bit into the reinforced metal, slowly creating openings large enough for armed soldiers to enter. The human could hear their tools working steadily closer while he continued making adjustments to the shield generators. Lieutenant Commander Williams reported that the enemy fighters had achieved optimal attack positions and were preparing to open fire. Queen Zara ordered all defensive batteries to engage the incoming threat, while knowing that her weapons lacked the firepower needed to stop such a coordinated assault. The fate of the nursery sector now rested entirely in Jake's hands. Queen Zara's personal guard unit made their final stand in the corridor junction that provided access to both the nursery sector and the maintenance areas. The Cathari warriors fought with savage fury against overwhelming odds, using their natural agility and razor-sharp claws to devastating effect in close combat. But energy weapons gradually wore down their numbers despite their superior fighting skills. Jake noticed that one of the shield generator assemblies was beginning to emit a high-pitched whine that indicated imminent mechanical failure. He grabbed his emergency repair kit and began replacing critical components, while the Vorthak cutting tools continued their work on the blast barriers. Every action required perfect timing and absolute precision, while death approached from multiple directions. Amy Rodriguez provided Jake with real-time updates on the tactical situation while coordinating with Queen Zara's. The young lieutenant had become Jake's lifeline to the outside world, her voice providing encouragement and vital information as he performed the most important work of his career. She had never admired anyone more than she did the human advisor who risked everything to protect innocent children. The first blast barrier fell with a resounding crash as Vorthak's soldiers finally broke through the reinforced barrier. Jake could see their silhouettes moving in the corridor beyond, weapons raised and ready for combat. He had perhaps 20 seconds before they would breach the second barrier and gain access to the maintenance area where he worked desperately to keep the cubs alive. The Vorthak fighters opened fire in perfect synchronization, sending devastating energy beams toward the nursery sector from 6 different vectors. Jake threw himself at the shield controls, pushing every system to maximum output, while praying that his repairs would hold long enough to deflect this final assault. The fate of hundreds of innocent lives hung in the balance of his technical expertise and unwavering determination. Part 6. The shield generators screamed with mechanical stress as Jake pushed them far beyond their design limits, channeling every available watt of power into deflecting the Vorthak assault. Brilliant energy beams crashed against the defensive barrier in a spectacular display of raw force, creating feedback loops that sent dangerous power surges throughout the maintenance area. The air filled with the acrid smell of overheating electronics and vaporized metal components. Queen Zara watched the tactical display with her heart pounding as the shields flickered under the sustained enemy bombardment. Each fluctuation in the defensive grid sent waves of terror through her noble frame, but she forced herself to maintain the composed demeanor that her crew needed to see. The Cathari Queen had never felt so helpless in her entire life, watching from afar while others fought to save the cubs she had sworn to protect. The second blast barrier began to buckle under the Vorthak cutting tools as enemy soldiers worked methodically to reach Jake's position. He could see the bright glow of their torches through the reinforced metal while sparks cascaded across the maintenance area floor. The human estimated that he had perhaps 15 seconds before hostile forces would breach his final line of defense. Chief Engineer Martinez monitored the reactor output, with growing alarm as containment fields struggled to maintain stability under the enormous power demands. Warning lights flashed across his control panels while automated systems repeatedly tried to initiate emergency shutdown procedures. He overrode each safety protocol manually, knowing that even a brief interruption in power flow would doom the Cubs to certain death. Jake's hands moved with desperate precision across the shield control interfaces, while sweat poured down his face despite the frigid temperature in the maintenance area. One of the primary generators was developing a harmonic resonance that threatened to tear the entire assembly apart, but he managed to compensate by adjusting the phase relationships between different power feeds. The system held together through pure willpower and technical expertise. Lieutenant Commander Williams coordinated the final retreat of Marine forces toward the nursery sector, while providing Jake with real-time intelligence about Vorthak movements throughout the ship. Her voice remained calm and professional despite the desperate circumstances, serving as Jake's connection to the outside world while he performed the most crucial work of his career. The Cubs' lullaby reached a crescendo as the young ones somehow sensed that the battle was approaching its climax. Their voices rose in harmony across species barriers, creating a sound that embodied everything beautiful and innocent about galactic civilization. Jake found himself drawing strength from their courage while his equipment sparked and smoked around him. Queen Zara's personal guard unit made their ultimate sacrifice in the corridor leading to the maintenance area, using their own bodies to block Vorthak advancement while the enemy soldiers cut through the final blast barrier. The elite Cathari warriors bought Jake precious seconds with their lives, falling one by one to overwhelming firepower while never yielding a single meter of ground. Amy Rodriguez detected anomalous readings from the Vorthak fighters as they prepared for a second wave attack, having somehow penetrated the shield defenses at multiple points. The enemy pilots were adjusting their weapons to exploit specific frequency gaps in the defensive grid, demonstrating a level of tactical sophistication that suggested extensive preparation for this assault. Jake realized that the shield generators could not withstand another coordinated attack without additional modifications to their operating parameters. He began implementing a dangerous procedure that would temporarily overload every system simultaneously, creating a massive energy spike that might either deflect the incoming assault or destroy the entire defensive grid. There was no time for careful calculations or safety margins. The final blast barrier collapsed in a shower of molten metal fragments as Vorthak soldiers prepared to storm the maintenance area. Jake could see their weapons pointed toward his position while he worked frantically at the control panels, knowing that any hesitation would result in failure. The human had accepted that he would probably not survive the next few minutes, but the Cubs would live if his plan succeeded. Chief Martinez watched his reactor displays reach critical levels as the fusion containment system approached complete failure. He had perhaps 30 seconds before being forced to initiate an emergency scram that would leave the entire ship powerless and defenseless. The engineer prepared to sacrifice his own life by manually containing the reactor breach, buying Jake a few more precious moments to complete his work. Queen Zara made a decision that would define her legacy as a leader and protector of the innocent. She activated her personal combat armor and left the bridge, against the desperate protests of her remaining crew, heading toward the nursery sector to make her final stand alongside Jake and the Cubs. The Cathari Queen would not watch from safety while others died for her principles. The Vorthak fighters achieved weapon lock on their secondary targets and prepared to deliver the killing blow that would overwhelm Jake's modifications to the shield system. Enemy pilots coordinated their approach with mathematical precision, timing their assault to maximize damage while minimizing their own exposure to defensive fire. Victory seemed inevitable from their perspective. Jake initiated the overload sequence just as the first Vorthak soldier appeared in the entrance to the maintenance area. Energy coursed through every circuit and component in the shield generation system, creating a brilliant display of electrical discharge that illuminated the entire space. The human threw himself across the primary control panel, using his own body to complete critical connections while hostile weapons opened fire around him. Lieutenant Commander Williams reported that additional Vorthak reinforcements were approaching the nursery sector from alternate routes, having bypassed the main defensive positions through careful maneuvering in damaged sections of the ship. The enemy was determined to reach the Cubs regardless of casualties, viewing their capture or destruction as essential to breaking coalition morale. Amy Rodriguez coordinated with the few remaining defensive systems, while watching Jake's life signs fluctuate wildly on her monitoring equipment. The young lieutenant realized that her friend and mentor was making the ultimate sacrifice to protect hundreds of innocent children, and she found herself struggling to maintain professional composure while tears streamed down her face. The shield generators reached maximum output just as the Vorthak fighters opened fire with their secondary assault, creating a collision of opposed forces that lit up space around the Coalition flagship like a miniature star. Jake felt electricity coursing through his body as he maintained physical contact with the overloading systems, his nervous system becoming part of the defensive grid through sheer determination and selfless courage. Queen Zara arrived at the maintenance area entrance just in time to witness Jake's heroic sacrifice, her golden eyes wide with admiration and grief as she watched the human give everything to protect her people's future. The Cathari Queen raised her weapons against the Vorthak soldiers while promising herself that Jake Morrison's courage would never be forgotten by any species in the Coalition. Part 7. The shield system exploded in a cascade of brilliant energy that momentarily blinded everyone in the maintenance area, but instead of failing completely, the overloaded generators somehow achieved perfect harmonic resonance with the ship's power grid. Jake had succeeded in creating a defensive barrier stronger than anything the Coalition had ever deployed. One that drew energy directly from the main reactor through quantum field interactions that defied conventional engineering principles. Queen Zara stormed into the maintenance area with her weapons blazing, her natural feline reflexes allowing her to engage multiple Vorthak soldiers simultaneously while they were still recovering from the energy discharge. The alien queen fought with savage ferocity born of maternal instinct and righteous fury, her claws and energy rifle working in perfect coordination to eliminate threats to the cubs beyond the bulkhead. Jake lay unconscious across the primary control panel, his body bearing the electrical burns that marked his integration with the shield generation system during its moment of transformation. But his vital signs remained stable, and Amy Rodriguez could see from her remote monitoring station that he had somehow survived the massive energy discharge that should have been instantly fatal to any organic being. The Vorthak's fighters' second assault struck the enhanced shields and simply vanished, their powerful energy beams absorbed and converted into additional defensive strength through the quantum field matrix that Jake had accidentally created. Enemy pilots found themselves facing an impenetrable barrier that grew stronger with each attack, completely overturning their tactical calculations and strategic plans. Chief Engineer Martinez stared in amazement at his reactor displays, as the fusion containment system suddenly stabilized at optimal levels, no longer straining under impossible power demands. The quantum field interactions had created a closed energy loop that made the shield system essentially self-sustaining, drawing power from the fabric of space itself rather than the ship's conventional sources. Lieutenant Commander Williams coordinated the counterattack against remaining Vorthak boarding parties, while Jake's revolutionary shield technology protected the entire ship from external threats. Coalition Marines began advancing through corridors they had been forced to abandon, systematically eliminating enemy soldiers who found themselves cut off from reinforcement or extraction. The cubs in the nursery sector sensed that the immediate danger had passed, and their frightened cries gradually transformed into joyous celebration as automated systems confirmed that the protective barriers were holding steady. Young voices from 12 different species joined together in songs of gratitude and hope, creating a melody that resonated throughout the ship's communication systems. Queen Zara knelt beside Jake's motionless form, while her medical officer examined the human for serious injuries. The burns on his hands and arms were severe but not life-threatening, and his neural activity showed patterns consistent with deep unconsciousness rather than permanent damage. The Cathari Queen gently touched his shoulder in a gesture of profound respect and gratitude. Amy Rodriguez established communication with the other Coalition vessels in the fleet, reporting that their flagship had not only survived the Vorthak's assault, but had somehow developed defensive capabilities beyond anything in their technical databases. The enhanced shields were protecting the entire ship while drawing negligible power from conventional sources, effectively making them invulnerable to energy weapons. The Vorthak fleet found themselves facing an impossible situation as their primary target became completely immune to their most powerful weapons. Enemy commanders attempted different attack vectors and weapon configurations, but every assault was effortlessly absorbed or deflected by the quantum field matrix surrounding the Coalition flagship. Their overwhelming advantage had been neutralized by one human's desperate innovation, Jake began to regain consciousness slowly, his vision clearing to reveal Queen Zara's concerned face, looking down at him with golden eyes that showed profound emotion. The alien queen helped him sit up carefully while explaining that his modifications to the shield generators had not only protected the Cubs but had revolutionized defensive technology throughout the galaxy. Chief Martinez arrived in the maintenance area with a full engineering team to study the quantum field interactions that Jake had somehow initiated during the shield overload sequence. The readings defied current scientific understanding, suggesting that the human had accidentally discovered principles of physics that opened entirely new possibilities for space travel and defensive systems. The Vorthak fleet commander made the decision to withdraw his forces rather than continue a futile assault against defenses that seemed to violate natural laws. Enemy ships began moving away from the coalition formation while their boarding parties surrendered or attempted to reach extraction points that no longer existed due to the enhanced shield coverage. Lieutenant Commander Williams reported that casualties throughout the ship had been surprisingly light, considering the intensity of the battle, largely due to Jake's success in preventing the Vorthak from achieving their primary objectives. The nursery sector remained completely secure, and all Cubs were accounted for and unharmed, despite the terrifying ordeal they had endured. Jake struggled to his feet with Queen Zara's assistance, his body still trembling from the effects of electrical shock and physical exhaustion. But his first concern was for the Cubs beyond the bulkhead, and he insisted on checking the life support systems to ensure that the enhanced shields had not interfered with environmental controls in the nursery area. Amy Rodriguez coordinated with Coalition Command to report the successful defense of the flagship and the revolutionary breakthrough in shield technology that had emerged from the battle. Scientists throughout the galaxy would spend years studying Jake's accidental discovery, but its immediate impact was already clear in the retreating Vorthak formations. Queen Zara opened the sealed entrance to the nursery sector, allowing the Cubs to see their human protector for the first time. Young beings from 12 different species rushed forward to thank Jake with hugs and gestures of affection that transcended language barriers. Their innocent gratitude and joyous celebration provided the perfect ending to a battle that had tested everyone's courage and determination. The Coalition flagship traveled safely toward friendly space, while scientists began preliminary studies of the quantum field matrix that protected them from all external threats. Jake Morrison had not only saved hundreds of innocent lives, but had accidentally provided his species and their allies with defensive technology that would change the balance of power throughout the galaxy for generations to come.